Have you ever wondered what's going on in your state in Fallout? Obviously, unless you live in California, Nevada, or Washington, D.C., or a select few others. Luckily for me, Honest Hearts gave me a little preview of what the current environment is like in Utah, and I seriously loved that. Seeing Zion, a place me and Paris have been to many times, come to life in a Fallout game was pretty amazing. So I wanted to make a video looking at all the information we have on every state in the US and what the current climate might look like for them. I want to make it clear that many of these states have almost no information and only references to them found in the games. So for those, I'll mention their references and some interesting info. We won't be speculating on what they might be like, and we're going to focus on only the confirmed canon elements. I don't want to get too long-winded on these, especially the places we've already seen and know and love. If you enjoy Fallout or videos like this, consider subscribing. We always appreciate you guys, and enjoy.
Let's go in alphabetical order, except backwards. Why? Because why not? And also because a lot of the states A through C we've already seen. We want to talk about new states and new things. Also, if we don't mention a state, then that means we basically have no reference or lore of that state at all. At least yet. So keep that in mind.
So while Wyoming doesn't actually appear in any Fallout games yet, it does get a few shoutouts, mostly as potential escape plans for factions who didn't quite have the best of luck elsewhere. First up, we've got the Great Khans. Depending on how things go during the second Battle of Hoover Dam, these guys might just pack up their chems and head north to Wyoming. Honestly, not a bad choice. Less NCR breathing down their necks and more open land for raiding, settling. Then we've got the Whitelegs, the violent wannabe Legion tribe from Honest Hearts. If Joshua Graham and the Dead Horses win their war, the surviving Whitelegs take off into the wilds of Wyoming. But turns out, Wyoming's winters are no joke. Half of them freeze to death and the rest just scatter to the winds, never to be heard from again.
Unable to shake the memory of their brutal defeat and the Dead Horses' savagery in battle, the Whitelegs feared further reprisals. They fled north, out of Utah, into Wyoming. The wilderness was harsh, and the first winter claimed over half the tribe. When spring came, the survivors parted ways in small bands, and so the Whitelegs died a quiet, ignominious death.
I think we can agree that maybe a nuclear winter wasn't such a great idea. These are the only references we've had for Wyoming, unfortunately. I think Wyoming would be a cool place to see. Mutated bison, geysers, it could make for an interesting setting. Similar to something like West Virginia in '76.
Speaking on West Virginia, let's talk about Appalachia and Fallout 76. Like Mason said earlier, we don't want to get too long-winded on games that we have already experienced, so we'll just go over the highlights and things of that nature. Appalachia, depending on who you are and how you say it, is divided into 6 regions, each with its own unique identity and challenges. The forest, with its rolling green hills and small scattered settlements, serves as a starting point for many survivors. Further north, the Toxic Valley is a wasteland coated in chemical residue, a deadly reminder of the pre-war industry that once thrived there. Travel south and you'll find yourself in the Ash Heap, an industrial hellscape where coal mines still burn long after the bombs fell. The Savage Divide, a vast mountain range cutting through the map, hides remnants of the pre-war elite, while the Mire is a dense, fog-covered swamp filled with mutated horrors. Then there's Cranberry Bog, a region as beautiful as it is deadly, home to the remnants of the Enclave and the fearsome scorched beasts that dominate the skies. Though Vault 76 residents were meant to rebuild society, they emerged to find Appalachia already filled with stories of those who had tried, and those who have failed. The Responders, a faction made up of emergency service workers, had attempted to help survivors, setting up camps and training centers only to be wiped out by the horrifying Scorched Plague. The Brotherhood of Steel made its way into the region, establishing strongholds and fighting off the Scorched, but even they were unable to hold their ground. What remains of these factions is scattered throughout the world, pieces of history waiting to be uncovered. Beneath the surface of Appalachia lies a web of pre-war secrets, particularly when it comes to its government and military operations. West Virginia was home to several classified facilities, including the White Spring Bunker, which acted as a shadow government hub where even high-ranking officials could survive nuclear annihilation. This bunker, heavily automated and still operational long after the bombs fell, became a key location for the Enclave. Outside of the Enclave's influence, Pre-war West Virginia was also home to projects like the Free States Movement, a group of survivalists who distrusted the government and took extreme measures to prepare for nuclear war. When the bombs did drop, they retreated into bunkers beneath the mire, only to meet a slow and tragic end when the scorched invaded. Their fears of government overreach turned out to be well justified, but in the end, isolation wasn't enough to save them. Of course, no story about Appalachia would be complete without its cryptids, the legendary creatures of West Virginia folklore brought to life in terrifying ways. The Mothman, a winged glowing-eyed enigma, appears throughout the game, sometimes as a passive observer, sometimes as a hostile force. The Flatwoods Monster, inspired by real-life UFO encounters, roams the land in its eerie floating form. Then there's the Grafton Monster, a headless brute that seems to be a remnant of some twisted pre-war experiment. These creatures, alongside the mutated monstrosities left behind by the war, make Appalachia one of the most dangerous and mysterious settings in Fallout history. But what West Virginia is like now, and also outside of the Appalachia region, is anyone's guess. We have no info on it beyond 76, which took place nearly 200 years before the current timeline. A lot of stuff could change in that time as the radiation morphs the wasteland even further.
I hate to be the bearer of bad news for my friends in Washington, but we have hardly any information to go on. And honestly, I think Washington and Seattle would make a really interesting setting for a Fallout game. In Fallout 76 in the town of Charleston, we can find a piece of junk mail. This one right here. It's likely one of those marketing scams designed to make the person open the envelope. We can see that it came from Walla Walla, Washington, from a company called Rockwell Clearinghouse. This is currently the only piece of lore we have mentioning Washington, which seems crazy. In Fallout 3, Jack Smith claims that Virginia has been gone for over 200 years, yet the spirit of the Commonwealth of Virginia supposedly lives on in Andale, a small settlement in the capital wasteland. Meanwhile, in Fallout 4, we get glimpses of Virginia's past through places like Thicket Excavations, which once ordered materials from a company based in Petersburg, Virginia. Though Fallout 76 focuses on West Virginia, Virginia itself is referenced quite a bit throughout the Appalachia. The Robco Research Center in Cranberry Bog is confirmed to be located within Virginia, thanks to messages from its administrator Lisa Fields. There's also Camp Venture, which started as a military training ground for the endurance and survival training of the Virginians program. This suggests that the region was once a key location for military preparedness, something that likely played a role in the war effort before the world collapsed. Even characters in Fallout 76 have ties to Virginia. Lacey Drummond and this person that I can't pronounce their name both hail from the state, with Lacey claiming that Virginia had more hot zones than even the radioactive wilds of Appalachia, which seems wild considering how ridiculously mutated the Appalachian region is. Joe Cree comes from the Virginia coast, and Russell Dorsey recalls meeting someone while traveling along a Virginian road. One of Virginia's most iconic locations, the Shenandoah National Park, appears in Fallout 76 as part of the Skyline Valley region. The Virginia School District even had buses operating in the area, with one such bus still visible, crashed into a tree near the South River Bridge. So we get some brief but interesting information on Virginia, especially with the hot zone comment. On October 23, 2077, Salt Lake City became one of the many casualties of the Great War. Within 7 minutes, 13 nuclear warheads rained down on the city, engulfing it in fire and leaving nothing but craters, collapsed buildings, and charred skeletons of once great skyscrapers. When the smoke finally cleared, all that remained were the ruins of a few unlucky survivors stranded outside the cities when the bombs hit, one of whom was Randall Clark, the legendary survivalist whose story is deeply tied to honest hearts. Unfortunately, his wife and child weren't as lucky, perishing in the destruction. Like most devastated cities, Salt Lake was soon picked clean by scavengers. Any remaining resources from food to weapons were stripped away over time. Even pre-war law enforcement gear like the SWAT vest worn by Joshua Graham was recovered from the wreckage and repurposed by those who would later shape the region's fate. By the 2280s, the city was still a dangerous place, overrun by wasteland horrors, including giant mantises so numerous that they covered the ruins like blankets. By the way, the mantis information comes from the Fallout Bible, which is mostly considered non-canon, so take that with a grain of salt. If anyone wanted to reach the city safely, their best bet was traveling via Interstate 80 or passing through New Canaan, a post-war settlement that would later be destroyed by the Whitelegs under the orders from Caesar's Legion. Though Salt Lake City itself is uninhabitable, its influence lingers in the Mojave and beyond. The New Canaanites, a group of Mormon settlers who once lived near the ruins, were deeply connected to its history, though their settlement was ultimately wiped out in Caesar's war against them. Meanwhile, the White Lakes scavenged heavily from Salt Lake's ruins, equipping themselves with old world weapons and armor to prove their worth to Caesar's legion. Perhaps the most famous figure tied to Salt Lake City is Joshua Graham, the infamous Burned Man. He was once a high-ranking officer of Caesar's legion, the original Malpais legate before being betrayed, set on fire, and thrown into the Grand Canyon. Graham survived, returned to New Canaan, and helped lead its people, at least until the White Lakes came knocking. His armor, specifically his SLCPD marked SWAT vest, is a direct relic of Salt Lake's pre-war past, linking him to the city even after its destruction. Deep in the heart of Utah, Zion Canyon, formerly known as Zion National Park, stands as one of the most beautiful yet battle-worn locations in the Fallout universe. Unlike the heavily irradiated wastelands of the Mojave, or even the Capital Wasteland, Zion was spared from the direct nuclear bombardment. While Fallout initially poisoned the rivers and wildlife, nature quickly recovered, making Zion one of the few places where clean, radiation-free water still exists. But that doesn't mean Zion was safe. Over the years, the canyon became home to survivors, scavengers, and later warring tribes that would shape its future. The first known post-war inhabitant of Zion was Randall Clark, a former US soldier who fled here after Salt Lake City was destroyed. He lived in isolation, documenting his survival in journals while watching over newcomers from the shadows. One of these groups was a community of children who later grew into the Sorrows, a peaceful tribe who viewed Clark, whom they called the Father in the Caves, as a guardian. But Zion's peace wouldn't last. Over time, warring factions, including the brutal White Legs, emerged, leading to violent conflicts over the land. When the White Legs, acting under Caesar's orders, destroyed the new Canaanite settlement, the surviving missionaries and tribes sought refuge in Zion, sparking a new full-scale war for control of the canyon. By 2281, the conflict in Zion had reached a boiling point. The exiled Joshua Graham, formerly Caesar's right hand, sought vengeance against the White Legs, while his fellow missionary Daniel hoped to preserve the Sorrows' innocence by fleeing the canyon. Their opposing ideologies clashed when the courier arrived, drawn into the fight by the ill-fated Happy Trails Caravan Company. The courier's decisions would ultimately determine the fate of Zion, whether to wage war against the White Legs or abandon the canyon entirely. There's a lot more fine details on Utah, like the Canaanites, but I think we get the big picture on what Utah is like these days. I, for one, find it super intriguing, but clearly I'm biased.
This would be my personal choice for the next setting of a Fallout game. Before the bombs fell, Texas was part of the Texas Commonwealth, a political entity that also included Arkansas. This region was known for its fierce independence and rich resources. During the Great War in 2077, Texas, like much of the world, was subjected to nuclear bombardment. However, due to its vast size, some areas remained relatively unscathed, at least initially, offering refuge to survivors. Before the Great War, Texas was still proud of its independent roots. A museum kiosk in the wasteland even reminds visitors that Texas was once its own republic before being annexed by the US in the 19th century. That Texas pride ran deep, influencing everything from firearms manufacturing, like Red Eagle firearms in Austin, to pop culture. Even in the world of baseball, Texas had a presence. On the eve of nuclear annihilation, a Texan team was battling the Boston swatting Sultans in what would turn out to be the last ever baseball championship. Despite its massive size, Texas's fate after the bombs remains largely unknown. John Cassidy, the old drifter from Fallout 2, wonders if Texas managed to survive the war, but there's no clear answer. Some people like Tex Rogers tried to return home after the world ended, though whether they made it back is anyone's guess. Meanwhile, the death car in the Vicky and Vance casino still carries the bullet holes from a famous pre-war shootout in Plano, Texas. Texas's law enforcement legacy also stretches into the wasteland, with Fallout New Vegas mentioning that the Desert Rangers, one of the oldest known groups of wasteland lawmen, can trace their roots all the way back to the famous Texas Rangers. It sucks that we don't have a lot of info on Texas, but it's also a good thing. It's a really big blank slate for Bethesda or whoever to make a cool Fallout game. While parts of Fallout 76's Appalachia region in West Virginia come somewhat close, there's no canon storyline crossing into Tennessee. If you're a player who does a ton of digging into holotapes and notes, you would have found that the Ladies Auxiliary Tape 8 in Boston mentioned that there are new mugs at a corner store made from Tennessee.
Gemma, what was in the news here last week?
Noella's made a cheesecake as big as a table.
No, not that. I mean, didn't somebody get mugged or something up the way?
Oh, yeah, right. Ernest did just get a whole lot of new mugs up at the corner store. Nice. Made in Tennessee, I think.
For Christ's sake, Gemma.
While an observations note from the Night of the Moth notes discusses traversing a mountain trail in Tennessee where, quote, "The wind carries a fine gray powder, which clings to my face and hair." Is this ash? Likely so, possibly suggesting a fire or facility causing damage to the air in the nearby region. Not much else can be said about Tennessee. There's only one man in all of the Fallout universe with the stones to mention South Dakota, Robert McCready, who jokingly says, "Some strange things turn up in these places. Ever hear about that warehouse in South Dakota? Yeesh." It's hard to say what secrets South Dakota hosts aside from a shady warehouse. When there's almost no info on a specific state that we're attempting to cover, then desperate times call for desperate measures. Can you name the Fallout item that is manufactured in South Carolina? The Lonesome Road is your only clue. I'll wait. It's the MRE. If you zoom in on this pixelated item, you will find that the MREs found in New Vegas' expansion hail from Mullen, South Carolina. Yep, that's it. We got nothing else to say about this place. Pennsylvania, thanks to the Pitt DLC for Fallout 3, which is set in the ruins of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, has a prominent place in Fallout lore. More recently, Fallout 76 introduced Expeditions, the Pit, allowing players to return to that same location. In Fallout 3, we learn of the oppressive conditions of local workers, many of whom are enslaved and forced to labor in the crumbling steel mills. A mysterious disease, often called troglodyte degeneration contagion, or TDC, afflicts many inhabitants, mutating them into trogs. While Pittsburgh was damaged by the Great War, it clearly avoided the total nuclear devastation seen in places like Washington, D.C. or LA. Its steel industry becomes a rare resource for forging weapons and goods in the wasteland, which is why raiders, slavers, and opportunists fight to control it in 2277. In 76, we enter the timeline of 2102 to 2103. Though the Pit is the same city from Fallout 3, the factions, visuals, and story elements differ somewhat given the earlier in-universe date, and we get a taste at how the early post-war history and its raider and labor dynamics first took shape. I mentioned the 76 piece since many players foregoed 76 and ignored it entirely. What we do know is that Pennsylvania was the location of a confirmed nuclear strike the day of the Great War. Why? This could be because a military operations center known as Raven Rock was located in the mountains of Pennsylvania at one point, perhaps a stronghold during the war. During 76, we find that those who settled at Foundation traveled to Appalachia from a variety of areas, including Pennsylvania, such as Aubrey Williams the Doctor. In the early post-war days, Pennsylvania may have been more pleasant than depictions by 2277, as several characters in the franchise wandered through the state unscathed. But with 150 years of time passing, the future is fairly bleak.
Anchorage was the center of a big battle, and because of this, it needed to pull resources from other states, such as the command forward depot that held munitions, supplies, and armor, that was then manufactured here and then shipped off to Anchorage for battle. It was ran by U.S. Army Quartermaster General Victor Breckinridge and based out of Oregon.
To General Constantine Chase, Anchorage Command, encoded message 457980A. Decryption applied. These crates contain only a portion of the items you requested on 09/17/77. Due to the increase in demand, we were unable to fill the entire order. Please distribute this equipment based on greatest need, and we'll attempt to send the rest of your request as soon as possible. Enclosed, you'll also find our new improved LAS 009 General's Overcoat. Hope it will serve as an appropriate upgrade. General Victor Breckinridge, U.S. Army Quartermaster, Command Forward Depot, Oregon.
So we know Oregon had a militaristic contribution to the war. We also know that Dr. Morrison Rand was a professor of anthropological archaeology at a college in Oregon and then was abducted by aliens.
I'll do what you want. This is Dr. Morrison Rand, professor of anthropological archaeology at Banfield College, Humboldt, Oregon.
Finally, Coos Bay, a coastal town that suffered from flooding post-war, was home to a chemist making jet. They abandoned the town, describing the situation as a shit show. If an apocalyptic Walter White is leaving their customer base because it's too chaotic, then we can likely assume that Oregon isn't doing too well these days. If you've ever read this letter from Vault-Tec in Fallout 3, it specifically mentions Oklahoma in a line reading, "For a full list of Vault-Tec facilities and available accommodations in exciting locales such as Oklahoma and newly annexed Canada, contact your local Vault-Tec representative." Do I think there's vaults in Oklahoma? Well, now I do, of course I do. But do I also think the letter was a funny way of making Oklahoma sound more impressive than it might really be? Just like Vault-Tec does with all of its vaults? Yes I do. The state of Ohio itself remains uncharted in the official narrative, with no dedicated storyline. But that doesn't mean it isn't mentioned here and there throughout the game. If you've explored Point Pleasant in Fallout 76, the North Road Bridge is an unmarked location in Fallout 76. This pre-war traffic bridge once allowed passage over the Ohio River, and was built at the site of the historic Silver Bridge after its collapse in 1967, which was serving as a link between Gallipolis, Ohio, and Point Pleasant, West Virginia prior to the collapse. And sorry if I mispronounced the name in Ohio. We also get bits that raiders in Ohio had once traded with raiders from the Crater Way Party, and that the recruit in the Brotherhood 1st Expeditionary Force named Initiate Norland is from Ohio too. If we want to get deeper into more Ohio-based objects from the game, the L.S. Smuckman Company, a pre-war foods organization, manufactured industrial-sized shortening that can be found throughout homes in Appalachia. There's also a connection to the infamous Mothman cryptid and its followers in Ohio, so there could be creepy lore ties here too. But this is really just a small theory at this point. Lee Rapid Pharmaceuticals was an American pre-war company that specialized in manufacturing quick-working medical supplies, similar to dispensers healing users in ways seen via Stimpaks. As with many other states, recruitment for the Great War did not turn a blind eye to this state. Given that Appalachia is so close to North Carolina, it's actually surprising we don't have more details on this state. New York, especially New York City, is presumed to have been heavily bombed and utterly devastated during the Great War. But no official game or DLC has ever taken place there. It's occasionally mentioned or alluded to in passing as one of the many major cities destroyed on October 23rd, but no canonical work has been elaborated on its post-apocalyptic state. Effectively, Fallout lore treats New York as a ruin so severely hit that very little is known about its current fate. There's a guy named Giuseppe living out in the Appalachia that has a connection to the Big Apple. If 4 of Giuseppe's riddles are correctly answered, he will confess his true reason for being in Appalachia to the Vault Dweller. His mother died in New York. He's come to Appalachia to seek out any surviving relatives from his time in Clarksburg. A former professional baseball player named Nathan Broadhurst heard that New York was worse off than where they had come from, and that the state was the location of a confirmed nuclear strike the day of the Great War. Although the Eastern Seaboard has already been done a handful of times from the Fallout team, who wouldn't want to see a ruined New York City make an appearance in the games or maybe the Fallout TV show in the future?
Most knowledge of New Mexico is brought in from rumors and truths with its connection to Caesar's Legion. Caesar himself mentions that the Legion has expanded into several states, including all of New Mexico. And although he's an asshole, I don't think he's lying about this conquest. A Legion slave further corroborates this statement when she tells you that she was originally from a small town in New Mexico before the Legion burned it and enslaved her. Finally, our man Dale Barton explains that trading with the NCR is way too expensive, so he usually sticks with doing business in Arizona and New Mexico. What we know is that New Mexico has been invaded by the Legion and that trade is relatively easy in New Mexico, assuming the Legion doesn't view you as a threat. Check out this creature we found from the wasteland in New Jersey. Allegedly, New Jersey isn't the spot you want to be in during the apocalypse. The Blue Ridge Caravan Company bartender Herschel Klein uses Hoboken, New Jersey as a punchline to one of his jokes.
Here's one I heard. We're all just living in a simulation. That's right, none of this is real. Die here, and you'll just wake up in a memory lounger somewhere in Hoboken, New Jersey. To be honest, I'm not sure which reality is worse. Ha ha ha! Thank you. I'm here all week.
I'm done with the New Jersey jokes, I promise. For those of you who ventured into 76 and continued into Atlantic City, you already know what New Jersey is like in Fallout. Before the Great War, Atlantic City was famous for its sprawling boardwalk and vibrant casino quarter, sandwiched between the Pine Barrens and the Atlantic Ocean. Carly Day, its last pre-war mayor, had set up the city government to run itself while she enjoyed an easy retirement. When the bombs fell, Atlantic City avoided direct nuclear hits but faced catastrophic flooding, destroying much of the city center, though the inland casino quarter was spared. Mayor Day, unfortunately, was ill-prepared for the crisis, dismissing nuclear threats as mere political drama. She struggled to manage rationing and relief efforts, eventually relying on the mob's assistance to secure food as shortages worsened. By 2078, the city descended into starvation and pure chaos, with Mayor Day detached from the reality of her suffering citizens. Things, however, only worsened until Timothy Lane, a local farmer, intervened after a mob attack on his farm. Witnessing the dire conditions firsthand, Lane took control of the city from Mayor Day, reorganizing the government alongside his wife Frida, who introduced methods to purify soil and grow food again. Under their leadership, the Munis restored order, providing essential services like power, clean water, healthcare, and security. To maintain stability, Lane formed a practical alliance with the mafia-led Lombardi family and the entertainment-focused showmen. This triad balanced power by assigning clear roles. The Munis handled governance, the family managed gambling and vice, and the showmen provided entertainment. Despite tensions and occasional disagreements, Atlantic City prospered, becoming one of the East Coast's most thriving communities. Recently, however, the city has faced new challenges. The overgrown, previously ignored as a minor threat, have emerged unexpectedly, straining the city's defenses. Additionally, growing tensions between the factions threaten the stability carefully built by Lane's pragmatic diplomacy, casting uncertainty on the city's future.
While Fallout 4 is set in the nearby Massachusetts, and the Far Harbor DLC takes the player to the coastal Maine, New Hampshire has never been a major location, had a dedicated quest, or received notable lore mentions in the franchise. Unless you recall this symbol. If you don't, I wouldn't feel too down about it. This is the New Hampshire and Massachusetts pre-war freight railroad and transportation company logo that was operated in the Commonwealth. Many of their boxcars can be found loaded with a variety of goods, including power armor and ammunition. NH&M had rail connections to the Boston Police rationing site, the Oberlin Station, and Bedford Station. These can also be found in Appalachia. Time to mention people's favorite. Nevada is most famously featured as the primary setting of Fallout New Vegas. The area around post-Great War Las Vegas, aka New Vegas, is known as the Mojave Wasteland, where multiple factions including the New California Republic and Caesar's Legion vie for control over Hoover Dam and its resources. Parts of Nevada also appear in Fallout 2 with New Reno, a mobster-run city, but New Vegas is where Nevada truly takes center stage in Fallout lore. Unlike places such as the Boneyard or the Capital Wasteland, Las Vegas was spared most of the direct nuclear hits during the Great War of 2077. Mr. House's intercept systems took out or diverted the majority of incoming warheads. As a result, large portions of the city's infrastructure remained standing. Despite fewer detonations, the Mojave was still rocked by the war's fallout and the collapse of national infrastructure, leading to a multitude of factions fighting for power in this area. Hoover Dam's continued functionality and the region's relatively intact roads made Nevada a hotly contested region in the post-war area between these factions. As most know, Las Vegas is renamed to New Vegas, protected by Securitrons and a walled strip. New Vegas remains a gambling and entertainment hub. Control of the strip's casino is divided among charismatic and often seedy families, the Tops, Gomorrah, and the Ultralux. But these families aren't the only factions here. The NCR is expanding eastward from California and sets up bases throughout the Mojave, seeking to secure Hoover Dam and the region's resources. Meanwhile, Caesar's Legion, a slaver empire formed east of the Colorado River, marches on Nevada to claim the dam, seeing it as a strategic and symbolic stronghold. Outside of the Hoover Dam and the Strip, Fallout 2 gives us a taste of New Reno, a lawless city controlled by various crime families, including the Mordinos, Bishops, Wrights, and the Salvatores. It's known for its casinos, drug trade, boxing rings, and general debauchery, often called the biggest little city in the wasteland. The city's events foreshadow the mob elements seen later in Fallout New Vegas, though on a smaller scale and with fewer direct ties to the Mojave storyline. The Mojave Wasteland, New Vegas Strip, Hoover Dam, and factions like the NCR and Caesar's Legion make it one of the most pivotal battlegrounds in the post-apocalyptic West. Most of us have seen Nebraska in Fallout and never even realized it. Do you remember Vault 33? The telescopic projector loops images of Nebraskan countryside to the ignorant 33ers. Not to make Nebraskans feel too bad, but I'd be okay if the devs or producers focused on other state expansions first. We definitely need a Fallout game with the setting in the high Rockies. We've had the Commonwealth, California, Vegas, DC, but what we haven't had is a remote high mountainous area filled with snow and mutated creatures, similar to what Jacobstown could be, but a whole game. Speaking of New Vegas though, our knowledge about this state all stems from that game. If you played New Vegas and you had the Lady Killer perk, You may have found a dialogue option when talking to the drifter that mentions having visited Montana. The lonesome drifter in New Vegas also mentions being from the direction of Montana, where he lived with his mother after his father abandoned them, until she passed away from hardship. He definitely looks like he's from the Great North. By the way, if you have any other references to this state or any other state, let us know in the comments. From what we can tell, it's relatively unheard of in the wasteland.
Missouri is one of those states mentioned in the canon but non-canon game Fallout Tactics. Prior to the Great War, Kansas City was a large nuclear launch site. Although the city was hit by the bombs during the war, the staff in charge of the silo somehow survived, but it doesn't mean they weren't affected. The staff morphed into ghouls and formed a town in the center of the ruined city called Gravestone. Before 2197, the ghouls of Gravestone lived in peace, forming both a community and a religious cult centered around the last intact nuclear bomb in their silo, which they revered as Plutonius. Their leader, T- served as both bishop and head of civil affairs. However, in 2198, Gamoran's army set up a base in Kansas City and attempted to seize Gravestone, aiming to claim the ghouls' sacred atomic bomb. The ghouls took refuge in their cathedral, where Plutonius was kept. A few weeks later, DEFCON, the acting leader, and bishop reached out to the Midwestern Brotherhood of Steel, pleading for their protection against the super mutants. The Midwestern Brotherhood answered the call, equipping the ghouls and cathedral acolytes with weapons and successfully fending off the mutant attack. The defense was led by the Warrior, who not only safeguarded Gravestone, but also launched a counterstrike on the super mutant base in Kansas City. This assault resulted in the deaths of 3 mutant commanders and secured the region. In return for their aid, the Brotherhood demanded Plutonius, later using it to breach the vault door of Vault Zero. Did you know Mississippi is the nation's largest weapons depot in the US? Fine, I'm not sure if it is. But what I do know is that a General Brock from Fort Strong, who was a commanding officer, sent launchers to a supply yard in Mississippi. Was Mississippi a hotbed for the invasion? Probably not. Was it likely a supply or distribution center for weaponry in the pre-war era? Likely so. Maybe one day we'll get to explore Mississippi's mysteries. As far as I know, there's only one reference to Minnesota. The fictional character Minnesota Fats, whose nickname is derived from the state's name, is mentioned as part of an advertisement for pool sets in Vault 21's gift shop. A terminal entry in the Vault advertising pool sets in the gift store has the tagline, "Hustle it like Minnesota Fats." This refers to Minnesota Fats, a fictional pool hustler created by author Walter Tevis. At least I think that's how you say his last name.
Fallout 4, in my opinion, appears to be one of the best Fallout games we've ever had. And although Fallout 4 refers to the state as the Commonwealth, it was technically called the Commonwealth of Massachusetts before the Great War. But like most locations, the Great War left its imprint on this state when it was finished with it. Massachusetts is arguably one of the most important states in Fallout lore because it's the setting of Fallout 4 in the Commonwealth. Boston and its surrounding regions are central to the game's main story, featuring major factions like the Institute, the Minutemen, the Brotherhood of Steel, and the Railroad. While there are no specific canon details highlighting Massachusetts as a special target of the Great War itself, beyond just being a major city center that was obviously struck, its post-war identity, especially the rise of the Institute, makes it crucial to understanding Fallout 4 and the broader East Coast storyline. So yes, we do know that it was bombed in the Great War of 2077, because although Boston's partial remains and neighborhoods are navigable, they are heavily mutated and scarred by radiation. However, Fallout lore doesn't describe a unique reason the region was singled out beyond it being a significant urban center and technological hub. Evidence of the blast's impact is mostly dramatically shown in the glowing sea, a highly irradiated region southwest of Boston, said to be near ground zero of one of the bombs. Unlike Washington, D.C., the capital wasteland, which was targeted for political reasons, or even Los Angeles, the boneyard for its military industry, Massachusetts' major significance in Fallout stems from its post-war role as the seat of advanced research and faction conflicts. The Institute, arguably the most advanced group in not only the Commonwealth but maybe all of the wasteland, operate beneath the ruins of the old Commonwealth Institute of Technology, a post-war analog of MIT. They've pioneered incredible technologies, including the creation of synthetic humans, which is a pretty significant contribution to Fallout lore. Meanwhile, the Minutemen, who are a local militia dedicated to protecting the settlements in the Commonwealth, received their name and iconography from historical Massachusetts and the American Revolution. We also have the Railroad, a clandestine organization focused on freeing and protecting runaway synths from the Institute. Their headquarters and quest lines are deeply intertwined with Boston's historical sites. Finally, the Brotherhood of Steel. A major Brotherhood airship expedition arrives in the Commonwealth, viewing the Institute's technology as too dangerous to leave uncontrolled. Little things like the Nuka World theme park built in Massachusetts also add to the richness of the series' history. So while its catastrophic bombing is never singled out in official lore as a unique or special strategic strike, Boston's post-apocalyptic remnants and the Institute's secretive tech make it one of the franchise's most significant locations for exploring the aftershocks of the Great War. Maryland's main ties to Fallout lore come through Fallout 3 and its Point Lookout DLC, both of which partially or entirely take place in Maryland. The DC wasteland itself spills across the old District of Columbia boundaries into parts of Virginia and Maryland. Although Washington, D.C. was a prime target in the Great War of 2077, there is no canon spotlight on Maryland's own nuclear strikes, their special military importance, or unique role in the war itself. Nonetheless, Maryland does feature prominently in Fallout 3's setting, and especially in the swampy backwoods intrigue of Point Lookout. Point Lookout avoided direct nuclear strikes during the Great War, but its waters and swamps became heavily contaminated from the irradiated Potomac River flowing from the capital wasteland. Over 2 centuries, dense swamps overtook the abandoned buildings, leaving nature to reclaim much of the region. The radiation drastically altered local life, resulting in mutated creatures like the swamp folk, who are violent, highly deformed, inbred locals, as well as feral ghouls and swamp lurks drawn to the radioactive waters. Despite the lack of structured civilization, visitors can still encounter and trade with isolated individuals like Tobar the Ferryman, Haley at Haley's Hardware, Hanada, Marguerite, and local tribal groups. Point Lookout has gained attention due to its rare punga fruit, unique to the area's bogs, and persistent legends about hidden treasures and pre-war technology waiting to be discovered. The marshes surrounding Point Lookout also contain pockets of biogas, primarily methane produced from decomposing bodies in Civil War-era mass graves. The radiation altered the decomposition process, creating areas of greenish-gray, smoking, steaming muck that occasionally release flammable gas bubbles, adding yet another layer of danger and mystery to the eerie swamps.
2 words: Far Harbor. This expansion to Fallout 4 is of course our lovely bit of lore of Maine in the Fallout universe. The island of Far Harbor is a primary setting of the expansion, and its significance is very Easter eggy. In Fallout 4's Far Harbor DLC, the player travels to Mount Desert Island, which in-universe is referred to simply as the island. The largest settlement there is Far Harbor, a coastal town protected from lingering radiation fog by rudimentary defenses. The storyline involves 3 factions: Far Harbor locals, the Children of Adam, and a synth refuge known as Acadia, all in conflict over land and ideology. The Vim Pop factory is situated on the island, and it may not have significance to war, but it's cool to see a competitor of Nuka-Cola here. The R&D employees were told to put the taste of Maine into a bottle. I'd imagine it tasted like sea salt and the sweat of Stephen King, cause you know, Stephen King's books are primarily based in Maine. Which reminds me, there's a pet cemetery on this island too, a nod to Stephen himself. Even the elaboration of the Children of Adam, which is a cult on the island, has subtle similarities with Stephen King's Mist, since the Children of Adam have this connection with fog, similar to the Mist book of Stephen King's lore. I could go on about the Easter eggs that Maine has in Fallout lore, but I'll stop the egg hunting here. Because of Fallout's alternate history, many states were hit during the Great War. Maine was presumably impacted, but there is no detailed canon account of nuclear strikes or major battles there, at least that we know of. Even known major military installations in the real-world Maine, like naval shipyards, do not factor heavily into any mainstream Fallout releases or official lore expansions. With the amount of cryptid lore that the Fallout franchise has introduced into Fallout 76, it would be cool to see a Louisiana expansion, since there could be cool culty shit or cryptid lore expanded on here. I know that may be a hot take, since even 76 fans are divided in how heavy 76 has leaned into weird lore, but I personally find it interesting. You'll find that many characters added in the Expedition's expansion of 76 have tiny tidbits of info from other states. Ellison is one of those characters. We know he was born in Louisiana before moving to West Virginia with his family. He was young when he moved, so there isn't a ton to expand on aside from this.
Who, me? Oh, I'm not that interesting. Came here from Kentucky, wanted to see more of the world. I had a pretty happy childhood. We had a whole commune. All the kids raised together, so I had like 24 siblings and Lots of parents. Got here, heard about the responders, and thought, that's for me. It's like my mom's always said, when everybody pitches in, there's nothing we can't do together.
This is some of the most credible evidence that Kentucky is also habitable, since this gal named Sophie clearly came from here. But what else do we know? Carver Timmerman from 76 mentions living in the state of what used to be Kentucky. John Henry Eden, that advanced AI antagonist from Fallout 3, claims to have grown up from Kentucky, but really this is because he borrowed this from the life of Abraham Lincoln. Perhaps the most important piece of info, in our opinion, is that the Independent Arms Group, which was a pre-war company, was a weapons manufacturer headquartered in Liberty, Kentucky. Oh wait, you don't know who this group is? The IAG name appears on the suppressor for the assault rifle in Fallout 4 and Fallout 76, so their weapons are used in the wasteland to this day. Like the characters who reference this place, Kansas is really only a mentioned-only place. Whether the nuclear fallout created a devastating Dust Bowl 2.0, or how it impacted the Midwest, really is anyone's guess. If you're deep in Fallout 76 lore, there's a place called the Pit, which is the remains of Pittsburgh. Anyway, a bloke named Ken, who was mentioned in the Expeditions update of 76, once talked about migrating to a city in Kansas. There's also a random character named Elliot who has a partner in Kansas, and this too is mentioned only in 76. So yeah, it's a stretch, but what I feel comfortable saying is that Kansas isn't completely uninhabitable since there are mentioned characters living there today. Well, in the future.
How often do you find yourself perusing the laboratory notes in Fallout 76? If you search really hard, you'll find a note from Dr. Constant Nichols saying, "It's Thanksgiving Day, and instead of spending time in Iowa with my folks, I've decided to stick it out at the facility to finish up the first round of my project." The doc's current project focuses on data sonification filtering, removing unnecessary background noise that the NERA array picks up from various stellar phenomena, such as plasma waves, planetary radio emissions, and particles striking our planet's magnetosphere. It's actually quite noisy up there in space. My particular job is to classify each individual sound and then create a filter so it can be removed from the array's desired frequency range. I'm almost done with my first quadrant, then I'll head home. And that's it. That's the only mention of Iowa in Fallout currently. Just this doctor who decided not to visit family in Iowa with her folks, and that was pre-war. For now, I guess Iowa will remain a mystery. For a state with as big of a city as Chicago, which has a thick history in US culture, it's a surprise we don't have more information on post-war Illinois or Chicago specifically. For now, we'll have to rely on a young boy named Tommy who once lived in Chicago. One day, Tiny Tommy came across Eddie, an iBot, and he persuaded his dad to take him in. He was excited to have a robot just like Ralphie the robot. He brought Eddie back to his mother's garage where he helped repair Eddie using a pre-war Illinois license plate. Tommy's story is heard through Eddie's audio logs in the Divide, but one thing that isn't provided in the audio logs is more info on post-war Chicago. The only other canon reference we have to Illinois is historical facts from Hannibal Hamlin in Fallout 3. And yes, I said canon for a reason because Illinois, particularly Chicago, appears in Fallout Tactics as the starting point for the Midwestern Brotherhood of Steel. However, Fallout Tactics has partial canon status, meaning certain broad ideas, like the existence of a Brotherhood splinter group in the Midwest, are considered valid, but many specific plot points are either considered non-canon or unconfirmed in modern Fallout continuity. Chicago would have been a likely target during the nuclear exchange in October 23rd, but there's no mainline Fallout game or developer commentary detailing the strikes or aftermath in Illinois the way Washington or Boston are detailed. So while it's safe to assume Illinois was significantly impacted, we don't have a thorough Bethesda-confirmed narrative on what exactly happened there. We all know that the Legion controls major portions of the Southwest, and depending on how you ended New Vegas' campaign, there will be a brief mention of the Spudley State. If the Great Khans are still allied with the Legion when the NCR wins, the remnants of the tribe are driven north into the wilderness of Idaho, following the Second Battle of Hoover Dam. This logistically makes sense because the Legion clearly has status in other parts of the world, such as Colorado, which we'll get to shortly. So they've clearly expanded more north than the Hoover Dam border. Very few states on this list get me as excited to think what if on other than Hawaii. Hawaii is such a random location to consider when we think of a post-apocalyptic location. In fact, I can't even think of another show or game that has really exploited a location like Hawaii after a nuclear fallout. Unless you consider Dead Island, which is zombies, but even still, I think Hawaii would be an interesting place to consider. The Pacific would likely be irradiated, but I would be curious if Hawaii is relatively pristine, with the main issue being communicating with the mainland. Aside from historical records in-game of what Hawaii was pre-war, the only mention of this location we have comes from Fallout 4's Far Harbor add-on, where a mentioned-only character named Thomas Davis, who was the champion of the Bar Harbor Bowling League in 2075, knew he was departing to Hawaii and promised his friends that he would send some pineapples if they promised not to try to bowl with the fruits. He kept in touch with them, sending them postcards until he suddenly stopped in April. But like I said, that's all pre-war anyways. Maybe something catastrophic did happen in the Pacific. Or maybe chaos to the country's infrastructure cut off the islands from the rest of the world.
If you're from the West Coast, did you know that the Appalachian Mountains extend into Georgia? Better yet, did you know that Fallout 76 takes place in the Appalachia? You probably did, but it's worth mentioning since many of us never played Fallout 76 due to its rocky launch. We mention this because although 76 has a diverse range of locations, the Appalachia is primarily radiated, lush and green, vast and likely humid. If you talk to Miss Brown, the leader of the villages in 76 at the retreat, she talks about how Appalachia's humidity is similar to what she felt back in Georgia. In Fallout 4, a character to have familiarity with the state is Matt Murtaugh, or Matt the Missile Murtaugh, who was a star pitcher of Boston's Swatting Sultans in 2077. And he's also a mentioned-only character that grew up in Atlanta. The only other mention that comes to mind is a foreman in Fallout 4, who briefly states he got his military background out in that part of the country. Aside from that, I don't know if we will ever see a ton of background on post-war Georgia, unless it comes in the form of some type of future expansion with 76. A Fallout game in Florida seems like a long shot, but we would love to see it. The white sanded beaches, swamps, and perhaps a few abandoned theme parks in the post-war setting would be awesome to see. If you recall bumping into the powerful merchant company operating on the East Coast known as the Blue Ridge Caravan Company in 76, bartender Herschel Klein says the Brotherhood 1st Expeditionary Force, which is a branch of the Brotherhood of Steel, and the organization at large, is really just a traveling theater troupe pretending to be soldiers. And one of his regulars claims to have seen Paladin Romani performing a trapeze act in Florida as proof. Obviously a joke, but also the only mention of the state. Florida has been relatively hush-hush throughout the games and TV series thus far. When envisioning Connecticut's role in Fallout, I like to think of The Last of Us, the type of post-apocalyptic setting, since most of what we know of this location in the post-war feels like transients are the main group residing here. There's primarily 3 characters associated to this place. First, Lance Ames, who is literally a mentioned-only character in Fallout 4, who reported being in the state when the bombs went off. And he clearly left the state. It's not a lot to go off of, but clearly Connecticut didn't offer a lot since he left. We then have Gilbert Hobson, who traveled to Appalachia from his hometown Monroe, Connecticut. This is transient number 2, of course. While traveling from Boston to Charleston in Appalachia in the immediate aftermath of the Great War, Jim Walker and Nathan Broadhurst followed Highways 90 and 84 until reaching a friendly group of travelers in Hartford, Connecticut. After joining together, the group continued on and would later split up in Pennsylvania. Of course, this is transient number 3. Overall, what we know is everyone that was here ended up elsewhere. The Fallout lore in Colorado is rather sparse, but we do have some cool characters that are acquainted with the state as well as the faction that controls the state. As we will mention shortly, in Fallout New Vegas, Caesar's Legion has a strong hold in the Southwest, and if you ever take the time to talk to Caesar himself, you'll find that one of the states he's expanded into includes much of Colorado. If you downloaded the New Vegas add-on of Lonesome Road and got acquainted with Ulysses, a former badass legionnaire, he will describe how Legate Lanius put Colorado to the sword. Aside from the fragmented bits of info we gain from the Legion, the cyberdog formerly known as Rex, who is a possible companion, served with the police in Colorado.
California is the cornerstone of classic Fallout lore. The first 2 Fallout games take place almost entirely in the post-Great War wastes of Southern and Northern California. It's where the Vault Dweller from Fallout 1 and the Chosen One from Fallout 2 undertake their quests, and it's the birthplace of many iconic Fallout elements. The New California Republic, the original Brotherhood of Steel, and the Master's Army of Super Mutants. Los Angeles, or the Boneyard in particular, was a primary nuclear target during the Great War, leaving much of Southern California in ruins. We could probably talk about this state for the next 2 hours if we wanted, because the lore and narrative are deeply interwoven here. So I'll try to bring up the bigger points and highlights, but also make it reasonable so that we don't take up too much time with it. After the Great War devastated America's west coast with nuclear attacks, major areas like San Diego and Los Angeles were left in ruins, with enormous craters marking the landscape, especially around what used to be Orange County. The scale of destruction made sense considering key military and research installations like the West Tech Research Facility, Mariposa Military Base, and Sierra Army Depot, which were all located in the region. Although casualties were immense, some survivors found refuge in underground vaults. Notable examples include Vault 13, which was well stocked due to its late completion, and Vaults 15 and 8. Those left above ground formed their own communities. Captain Roger Maxson, for instance, led a group of renegade soldiers at Mariposa to establish the Brotherhood of Steel. Even smaller towns like Junktown, started by a former soldier, began to sprout up. By 2080, radiation had triggered mutations, dramatically altering wildlife and humans. The chaos eventually settled enough for survivors to form new societies. In 2083, the irradiated survivors from Vault 12 found a necropolis beneath Bakersfield. Soon after, other vaults opened, leading to the establishment of significant settlements like Vault City in 2091 and Addington in the Los Angeles Boneyard in 2092. In 2093, Angus founded the hub around a small desert oasis. It quickly became a vital trading center, introducing bottle caps as currency, soon becoming the standard across the wasteland. Harold, a notable caravan trader from Vault 29, became prominent in the hub by 2096. Vault 15 then opened in 2097. But overcrowding pushed many of the dwellers into the wasteland, forming raider groups known as the Khans, the Vipers, and the Jackals. The remaining settlers established Shady Sands in 2098, using their vault gex for a fresh start. This small town eventually laid the groundwork for the powerful New California Republic, changing the future of the wasteland entirely. For a short while, the wasteland saw relatively calm, interrupted only occasionally by mutant attacks on trading caravans. By 2102, however, these attacks grew increasingly frequent, causing severe disruptions in trade. To address this, Harold teamed up with Richard Gray, an exile from Vault City, forming one of the wasteland's first adventuring groups to find the source of these mutant threats. On May 22nd, they set out from the hub with several others, discovering the Mariposa military base about a month later. The base had deteriorated after being abandoned by the Brotherhood of Steel, leaving its dangerous forced evolutionary virus vats exposed. This had allowed a new breed of mutants to emerge and threaten the region. During a confrontation, Gray accidentally fell into the vats and Harold was knocked unconscious. He was then later rescued by traders and brought back to the hub. Harold's incomplete exposure to FEV left him mutated into a ghoul-like figure. Upon returning home, his former associates abandoned him, turning him from a successful caravan leader into a wandering outcast. Meanwhile, Gray endured extreme mutations from his overdose of FEV. After weeks of suffering, his condition finally stabilized, and by November, he began experimenting with the virus on animals and eventually humans. Gray adopted a new identity, the Master, and he developed the concept of the Unity, a plan for a superior race of super mutants. With an army formed from those his mutants had captured, the Master's influence quickly began to spread across the wasteland. Throughout the 2150s, many wasteland inhabitants were still unaware of the growing threat posed by the Master and his mutant army. Meanwhile, the Brotherhood of Steel rose as a dominant force after defeating the Viper Raiders in 2155. Under John Maxson's leadership, the Brotherhood established trade with the hub, despite occasional tensions, especially after the water merchants attempted to steal their weapons. By the early 2160s, the Brotherhood discovered the existence of the super mutants, prompting heightened security measures. In December 2161, a vault dweller left Vault 13 searching for a replacement water chip, but soon stumbled upon the Master's plans. Allied with the Brotherhood, the vault dweller defeated the Master beneath the cathedral and destroyed the Mariposa military base, effectively ending the Unity. Despite these heroic efforts, the vault dweller was exiled by the Overseer, leading to a small group leaving the vault to join him. Together, they founded Arroyo in 2165. Marcus, a former Unity soldier, and Jacob, a Brotherhood knight, formed an unusual partnership in 2185, leading to the creation of Broken Hills, which was a peaceful community of mutants and humans. Meanwhile, the Vault Dwellers' heroics had allowed settlements like Shady Sands to flourish, eventually leading to the establishment of the NCR. The NCR quickly grew into a regional powerhouse, significantly expanding under Tandy's presidency, becoming the Wasteland's major political and economic force by 2241. Conflicts emerged notably around Redding and its valuable gold supply, creating rivalries between the NCR, Vault City, and New Reno. Simultaneously, a shadowy group known as the Enclave sought to eradicate humanity using a deadly variant of the FEV. Their plans were thwarted by the Chosen One, the Vault Dweller's descendant who saved kidnapped settlers and destroyed the Enclave's base. Under subsequent NCR leadership, aggressive expansionism took hold, especially after President Tandy's death in 2248. General Aaron Kimball's presidency saw further expansion, notably securing Hoover Dam and pushing into the Mojave. However, the NCR's growth led to conflict with the Brotherhood of Steel, severely damaging both factions economically and militarily. The NCR's dominance faced a dramatic setback after Shady Sands was destroyed by a nuclear attack post-2281. This catastrophe destabilized the Republic, allowing the Brotherhood to regain power in certain areas. In the ensuing chaos, smaller factions filled the vacuum left by the NCR's retreat, reshaping the wasteland once again. And this is where we are currently with California during the filming of this video. I'm sure when season 2 of the Fallout TV show drops, we'll get more info on not only California, but also the Mojave. So make sure you stick around because we'll cover all that info when it drops.
If you've played Fallout New Vegas, then you know Arizona pops up quite a bit within the game. Whether it's specific locations like the Arizona Spillway, located on the eastern side of the Hoover Dam, hearing about it when talking with Dale Barton as he states that trading with the NCR is too expensive, so he usually sticks with doing business in Arizona and New Mexico, or when getting to know Caesar's Legion since he's allegedly expanded into all of Arizona and his main man Legate Lanius was a member of the Hydebarks tribe who hails from the state itself. After the Great War, Arizona was largely fragmented, with each town fighting their neighbors just to survive, and the region so heavily infested with raiders, trade between towns was virtually impossible. The Legion's rise to power served to significantly decrease the violence, with either scaring or killing off all the raiders. So maybe the Legion wasn't entirely terrible. But then again, the Legion crucified members of the Twisted Hares alongside Interstate 40 in Arizona after betraying them at Dry Wells. Further Arizona lore is expanded upon depending on how you play New Vegas 2. For instance, if the Enclave remnants were told to support the Legion in the Second Battle of Hoover Dam, Caesar died and the Legion defeats the NCR. It is stated that the remnants were pursued by Legionnaires into Arizona, losing hundreds of Legionnaires in the process and gaining nothing in return. If Caesar dies or is killed prior to you visiting Zion Canyon, Joshua Graham can mention traveling into Arizona as part of his missionary work as well as remarking on Caesar's death. Caesar's Legion is perhaps the biggest piece of Fallout lore that introduces us to the state itself. Whether you're talking to the followers of the Apocalypse that mention Arizona when describing those impacted by Caesar's Legion, or simply roaming the Mojave, you're bound to get insight into the close ties the Legion has within this beautiful state.
A pre-war newspaper known as the Boston Bugle had once reported that American troops were fighting in the Great War from Anchorage, Alaska to China. And this is made apparent for the small minority of us that have played Fallout 76. Since if you ever take a stroll in the converted munitions factory, a supervisor questions why they have stockpiles of bullets in the factory instead of sending them to Alaska. The mining headquarters location in 76 also talks of the deteriorating situation in the Great Wilderness of Alaska, if you ever find the time to pop open one of the terminals there too. However, if you're an OG fan of the series and have played Fallout 3, you may have seen the US declaration of war on China, and although there's multiple scrolls to this declaration, there is mention of Alaska in these articles. So clearly, as we all know, Alaska was a front line for the Great War. The People's Republic of America radio also chatters about the quote, Alaska Front, further alluding to the importance of this state in the war. We also know that Liberty Prime has mentioned Alaska as well. It states that its mission is the liberation of Anchorage, Alaska, and the only reason a location needs to be liberated is if it's unliberated, alluding to Anchorage not holding the front lines like it was intended to. And our boy Reginald Rothschild, or Scribe Rothschild, mentions apparently Liberty Prime was meant to help liberate Alaska from the Chinese, but was never completed. They were forced to go in without him. One of the few remnants of Anchorage actually lies in a character known as Constantine Chase, who was a pre-war United States Army general and commanding officer of the Anchorage Reclamation, a military operation that repelled Chinese forces from Alaska in January 2077. The Lone Wanderer encounters and receives orders from a computer-generated reconstruction of Chase during their run-through of the Anchorage Reclamation simulation in the Fallout 3 add-on Operation Anchorage. As the Lone Wanderer, this add-on gives us the full glimpse into the greatest battle of the Fallout universe, the liberation of Anchorage from the occupying Red Chinese troops. This simulation is set during the Anchorage campaign, which occurred between June 2076, when the T-51B power armor was first introduced, and January 2077, when Chinese forces were completely driven out of Alaska. Evidence locatable in the Outcast outpost makes it clear that the simulation is not an accurate recreation of the battle in many important ways. However, these ways are never detailed but are blamed on General Chase, who was the military correspondent for the simulation program. Aside from the blurred reality in this simulation, the remnants of the Alaskans' important lore in Fallout can be found in tidbits of items or characters, such as the Hubris Comics Summer 2077 schedule including Tales from the Front, Alaska Unbowed. Or when John Elwood in Fallout 4 wrote to his colleague Wilfred Bergman that although he may have been better hacker of the two during college, more advanced security measures had been developed while he was away fighting in Alaska. So what do we know about Alaska now? Nothing. But I would assume it's probably one of the most ravaged regions in the US thanks to the war. The nuclear winters and possible mutated polar bears would probably make any wastelander think again before traveling there. But who knows?
And that's it. Like we said earlier, if we didn't mention your state, then there's no known lore or references of that state beyond general things like the maps and commonwealths. What state is your guys' favorite? And which one do you think will be in Fallout 5 setting? Let us know. Thanks for watching, and remember, enjoyed time is never wasted time, and we'll see you in the next.